first trailer for the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was released a few days ago, and it's caused quite the hullabaloo on social media, especially amongst fans of the original Hunger Games series. I am a massive fan of the series. Both the books and the movies are YA dystopian excellence, and Catching Fire is unironically one of the best movies ever made, and I will die on that hill. I love this series so much that I'm actually planning on making a deep dive video into both the books and movies, so stay tuned for that hopefully later this year. In 2020, when I found out that Miss Suzanne Collins was releasing a prequel to the series, I was stoked. Panem, flawed as it is an interesting world with 75 years worth of Hunger Games to explore, not to mention all the history before the First Rebellion and the introduction of the games. There was so much room here to expand the world, and I was here for it. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was released on May 19th, 2020, and it received mixed reviews. Some people loved it and found it a rich addition to the Hunger Games saga. Others found it boring and unnecessary, and even more found it a little bit disappointing, but in the end, just alright. These mixed reviews definitely scared me, but I had to remind myself that this was not the first time such a phenomenon occurred within the Hunger Games fandom. Mockingjay, the last book of the original series, also received mixed reviews from fans upon its initial release, with many of them leaning towards negative. I remember a lot of people hating this book when it first came out, for a number of reasons, including but not limited to that it didn't have enough action, that Katniss didn't do anything, and that the war ended off-page. When I first read it when I was younger, I had similar issues, but as I've grown older and reread this book and just gotten a better understanding of what the Hunger Games series is trying to be, I found myself appreciating Mockingjay more and more for what it is. I don't want to get too deep into it now since I will be doing a deep dive video, but Mockingjay is not so much an action-packed chosen one fantasy about ousting evil and bringing in good, but more a grounded account of the difficulties of revolution and the physical and emotional toll it takes on both individuals and a nation as a whole. I understand why Mockingjay received the reviews it did. Those themes are not necessarily the kinds of things people wanted to read back then, myself included. Mockingjay is unsettling and deliberately unsatisfying in its conclusion. It does not reach a catharsis that most other YA series released around this time did. I think my journey with Mockingjay better prepared me for the reception of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Like I said, this was a divisive book upon its release, but unlike the way many opinions on Mockingjay changed with time, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes remains divisive. I mean, it has a fair enough rating on Goodreads, but a large number of reviews are 3 stars or lower, with the occasional 4 or 5 star review thrown in there. Of course, this isn't definitive proof that most people don't like this book, as we're more likely to leave a review if we didn't like something than if we did, but it's pretty wild to scroll through, especially considering how beloved the original series is. When this book came out, I did plan on reading it, but the more time that passed and the more 1 and 2 star reviews I saw, the less and less interested I became, so I just didn't read it. Yes, to this day, I have not read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It was disheartening for me to see this many negative reviews. Again, I love The Hunger Games. It's precious to me in a way that few other stories are, and I think it has a lot of merit, both enjoyment-wise and academically, and I didn't want to sully that with a new story that I might not like. But though I've avoided reading it, the idea of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is one that has stuck with me. Clearly, I love analyzing pop culture, and with the release of the film adaptation only months away, I started thinking more and more about why this book seemingly flopped as hard as it did, and I came up with a couple reasons. Number 1, this is not the story that people wanted. Like, at all. The idea of a Hunger Games prequel story was so exciting, mostly because of the large cast of characters we meet in the original series, all of whom have fascinating and heartbreaking backstories. For fans, an ideal Hunger Games prequel would tell the story of one of these characters. Finnick, Joanna, Mags, Annie, hell, even Wyrus or Beetee. Their games would all make for riveting prequels that fans are dying to see. But I think the story that we would have lobbied for the most would be the second quarter quell, aka Haymitch's games. The story was right there, the stakes are already written. It would be something familiar, kids killing each other for entertainment, but with raised stakes that are built in, that keep it fresh. Double the number of tributes, the same number of victors. We know some details about Haymitch's games already, but there's also a lot we don't know, so there's room for creativity. Throw on top of that the tragedies Haymitch experiences after the games, and you've got a banger of a book. But instead of exploring the trials of a beloved character and his tragic descent into depression and alcoholism, we got a story about President Snow before he was president. And, yeah, nobody wanted that. Number 2. There weren't enough games, and/or the games were boring. Now, I can't corroborate this personally because, again, I didn't read the book, but from what I've heard, the main attraction of any Hunger Games book, aka the games themselves, were quite lacking in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now, putting aside the ironically dystopian notion of fans being disappointed that the child murder game wasn't more exciting, I kinda get it. It's the Hunger Games. You come for the murder game so you can root for your favorites, cry when they get killed, and be on the side of the characters when they stand up for their rights against the government that's taking them away, which I guess makes us one step better than the Capitol. And if said murder game isn't eventful, well then what are we even reading about? There were a myriad of other reasons people didn't like the book, like wonky pacing, inconsistent characterization of Snow himself, and a rushed ending, but I think the two that I outlined kind of shot this book in the foot before it even came out. Having said all that, I do have rebuttals to both aforementioned points. While a story about Haymitch's games, or any previous Victor's games for that matter, would have pleased fans more, it would have also been rehashing a story that we technically already know. Again, there was room for creativity with the story and new aspects we didn't know, but the overall story is familiar, and I understand why Suzanne Collins was more interested in exploring aspects of a different character that were otherwise unknown to us. Although I do still think it would be awesome to explore these characters' backstories, preferably in an anthology series. I have never seen a world so well suited to the anthology format. Seriously, someone with power, please get this made. As for the lackluster games, I think the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is not about the games. At least, not in the way that the first book of the original series is. Technically, the only book in the original Hunger Games series that is first and foremost about the games was the Hunger Games itself. Catching Fire, while it does feature the games, is about growing unrest in Panem, seeds of revolution being planted, and the Capitol's desperate attempts to squash it by first utilizing Katniss, then getting rid of her. Mockingjay, as previously mentioned, is about the intricacies of revolution. It doesn't feature a formal games, but does include brutal violence orchestrated by the Capitol to make spectacles of the rebels' deaths to recapture the nationalist propagandizing purpose of the formal games. Neither Catching Fire nor Mockingjay are actually about the games. Rather, the games are used as a backdrop to explore other themes. I'm fairly certain the same is true of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. The book is about Coriolanus Snow's rise through government and simultaneous descent into corruption. It makes perfect sense to me, at least, as a person who hasn't read the book, for the games to be a backdrop for that. Speaking of Snow himself, I was never truly opposed to the idea of a prequel following him. After the initial disappointment of not getting to follow a beloved character subsided, I actually thought a story about Snow's descent into the manipulative tyrant he is would be so intriguing. Snow in the original series is a fascinating character. He's ruthless, but intelligent and sophisticated, and it's those qualities that make him so terrifying. His relationship with Katniss is very well written and nuanced, even though the two share all of 3 or 4 scenes together in the entirety of the series. I always thought it would be riveting to see Snow become that person, especially with Suzanne Collins' writing talent behind it. Anyway, even with all the mixed reviews, it seemed pretty inevitable that The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes would be picked up for adaptation. The original series was crazy profitable, so of course this was the next natural step. The first trailer dropped on April 27th, and I have to say that it looks pretty awesome. It's a good trailer. It reintroduced Panem, but in the past. Peter Dinklage is here, Viola Davis eats for the 10 seconds she's on screen, Rachel Zegler bows at the reaping like Katniss did at her individual evaluation, all while absolutely seething on the inside. It goes hard, I gotta give it to them. Watching this trailer gave me the first bit of excitement I felt towards this story since the book's announcement in 2020. It allowed me to hope, just a little bit. Because literature and film are different mediums, and translating one to the other is like getting a second chance. Sometimes this can be bad, but when it's good, damn is it special. Obviously there are the big differences in delivery and form, but there are also tiny differences in style that you don't really register when creating in one medium. Sometimes these stylistic differences can elevate a story beyond what it was originally. Case in point, the opening scene of The Hunger Games. The movie starts with an interview between Caesar Flickerman and Seneca Crane. Caesar asks Seneca what defines his personal touch as head game maker, and just as Seneca is about to answer, we cut to Prim screaming in District 12. It's brilliant, and not really possible in written form. I suppose you could pull it off, but to do so, you'd have to be thinking like a screenwriter and not an author. It's a change that was made for the film that suits the medium. Here's another example from Catching Fire. During the individual evaluation, Katniss sees that Peeta has painted a beautiful portrait of Rue's dead body surrounded by the flowers Katniss arranged for her. Moved and incensed by this, Katniss decides to make her own demonstration. She hangs a dummy and labels it Seneca Crane, effectively letting the game makers know that she knows what happened to Seneca, and telling them that this could be them too. What's more is that Seneca died technically because of Katniss's actions, so this show is equal parts a massive middle finger and a sinister warning that the game makers are just as safe as Katniss is. As Katniss walks away, leaving the dummy hanging, we hear the opening notes of Caesar Flickerman's hard-ass theme before cutting to interview night as Caesar walks on stage to greet the audience. Listen, I am always on my knees for this transition. It goes so hard. But also, this is basically a match cut, with Caesar's body taking up the center of the screen the same way the dummies did in the previous one. It's a visual cue that Katniss's warning was not only for the game makers, but applies to everyone in the capital, especially people with influence. Caesar Flickerman could very easily end up like Seneca, and after PETA if it wasn't for the baby Malark, and all 12 districts holding hands, that is a real concern for him. That is the face of a man who was looking death in the eyes. The idea of no one being safe from the capital is perfectly encapsulated with one simple cut that is otherwise impossible on page. These are tiny examples of how translating a story into a different medium can change and even elevate it. But of course, a different medium can change a story in huge, obvious ways as well. Putting the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes to film offers a chance to use the best parts of visual storytelling and gives this story another chance to stick the landing. I've made peace with the two aspects I outlined before, and I'm hoping that a new medium will be able to fix some of the other issues the book had, like pacing, rushed ending, etc., etc. But while I have a glimmer of hope, I'm making sure it doesn't grow too much. Because while adaptation can be good, it can also be bad, of which we are well aware. As much as I hope an adaptation can fix pacing problems, for example, I also know it probably won't. If a 500-page novel has pacing problems, then translating that into a 2.5-hour movie sounds nightmarish. So where do I land with all of this? Well, I think President Snow himself can sum it up best.
A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. A spark is fine, as long as it's contained.
I am excited? ? I know there's potential here, but potential can be wasted. I'm kind of unsure about the whole thing, but the one thing I am certain about is a decision I made during the process of getting all my thoughts out, and that is that I will not read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes before watching the movie. I know, crazy decision, but hear me out. I have spent the majority of my life being a read the book before watching the movie kind of person, and for the most part I still am. When I was younger, it just seemed like the right thing to do as a person who was primarily a reader. Now it's become a bit of an exercise in my own growth as a writer. I like being able to study both mediums side by side to analyze what decisions were made and why, and what works and what doesn't. But there's some sort of block in my brain when it comes to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I don't think I can bring myself to read it before watching the movie. For once, I would like to raw dog this movie and experience it as a film primarily. Then, maybe I'll read it. But as of now, the story exists as a movie in my head, and I want to see how my experience with it will differ from those who read the book first. But most of all, like I said earlier, I love The Hunger Games, and an irrational part of me wants to do whatever I can to make my experience with The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes as positive as possible. And as of now, I think the movie is my best bet. But also I'm terrified the movie's gonna suck. As of now, this is where I stand. I'll probably return to this topic after the movie comes out, so see you in November.